everybody. Nice to see everybody here. Some faces I recognize, some I don't. I apologize that I came late, and I'm going to leave right afterwards. So I was at some place this morning and heading to another meeting.
We understand.
Okay. Rabbi Ezra asked me to speak about Bishul Akum, and these are my thoughts. On the one hand, Bishul Akum is a very serious concern. In food service, it's a big focus of what Mashgiach do, take care of Bishul Akum. If food is Bishul Akum, the guy cooked it and the yid wasn't part of the cooking somehow, then that food is treif. It's just as treif as anything else. And to the point that even if it was made on kalim or went onto dishes, we have to kasher afterwards. Okay, so it's serious in the sense that it's not just a nice thing that we do. It's something that would make the food treif. It will make treif enough that we'd even have to kasher the dishes afterwards. And the most common ways that, at least to my knowledge, I'm not a food service mashgiach, of when mistakes happen I have three examples of the same thing, which is I turn on the fire and somehow that fire goes out even though I turned it on. My three examples of that are convection oven, rice cooker, and an induction burner. Okay? And those are in a convection oven. In a convection oven, you turn it on, but when you open the doors, the fires go out. If I leave it open so I turned it on in the morning, but if an hour later, the fire may actually be completely out, and therefore I could miss out on it being Bishul. So the same thing with a rice cooker. Rice cookers, once you pull the pot out, or once it finishes its cycle, it turns off. In many of them, it turns off. So I could turn it on, I could plug it in, and never know that that it went off afterwards. In fact, in a different hashgacha that there was a connection to, somebody walked in to look over the hashgacha, and he said, what do you do about the rice cooker? Mashgiach says, I don't know. He said, how do you turn on the rice cooker? And the Mashgiach said, I don't know. He turns to one of the workers and says, how do you turn on the rice cooker? So they already knew we were in trouble, And then they called up the Rav Masha, and Rav Masha had a whole topol why he didn't think it was a problem. And that was sort of the end of that hashgacha, So it didn't bode well for them. But a rice cooker, even if you turn it on, it goes off. It doesn't stay on forever. Okay, and the last was an induction burner. I don't know how common it is in restaurants. Maybe in hotels it's more. Which is an induction burner, which is it's a burner where you turn it on, but it only heats up if you put a metal pot onto it. Okay, if you put your hand onto it, or you put something that's not certain kinds of metals on, not a magnetic, something that would be magnetic, it won't get hot. So if I turn it on, it doesn't stay on. It doesn't mean anything. I turned it on while the pot's there. It's on. As soon as I take the pot off, there's nothing there anymore. Okay, there is a way around that. There's a way around it. We put a disc onto it that keeps it hot all the time. But it's something just to be aware.
But that's electric.
It's electric. Yes. So something that's cooked with electric also needs to be Bishul Yisrael. It has to be part of the cooking. So I turn it on, but there's nothing there. If you put your hand on it, it's cold. There's no heat.
So that means the Mashgiach would have to put the pot on it.
Right. The Mashgiach has to put the pot on it.
Somebody puts the pot on it first, then you turn it on.
Or you turn it, right.
And also mix the food. You make it.
Right. So my point is, it's the situation where you could turn the fire on, but yet an hour later, it's not Bishul Yisrael anymore. Or an hour later, what you did is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Okay? So there's different ways of solving the problem, but just to point out this. Okay. Now, there are two main rules of Bishul Akum, which foods need Bishul Yisrael. And those two main rules are, the only foods that need Bishul Yisrael are foods that are oil shulchan lachem. They're fancy foods. We view that as something that would be served like at a wedding or a more sophisticated banquet. So French fries don't need Bishul Yisrael. Technically, they don't need Bishul Yisrael because no one serves. It's not typical to serve French fries at a fancy event. And the other rule is it has to be not oil shulchan. It has to be not nefachai. It has to be food that's not edible raw. Okay, so if somebody cooks carrots, carrots are edible raw, they don't need to be Bishul Yisrael. Now, those two rules that I just told you, those two rules are the technicalities of it. In truth, those don't need to be Bishul Yisrael. And if it was a factory setting, and they were making French fries, we would tell them, your French fries don't need to be Bishul Yisrael. Okay? That's all in the factory setting. That's all in the technicalities of what does or doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. But in policy-wise, in running a food service kitchen, those things don't fly. When we run a kitchen, the rule is everything needs to be Bishul Yisrael. The Yid turns on all the fires. The Yid makes sure everything is Bishul Yisrael. Because of the seriousness of Bishul Yisrael and the little subtle details of what does or doesn't, the simplest rule is to say is everything needs to be Bishul Yisrael. Yid has to turn on the fires. Yid has to make sure everything is made Bishul Yisrael, except for maybe the most strange exception. You let the guy put up the hot water for coffee. But basically, everything that gets cooked in the place needs to be Bishul Yisrael.
So, let's say with French fries,
Mm-hmm.
in a restaurant setting, if for some reason the non-Jew turned it on.
That's what I'm coming to. So that's very much what I'm coming to, which is, I'm going to give you a number of examples, but the French fries is a good example to start with, which is, in din, there are many exceptions of which foods don't need to be Bishul Yisrael, or when it's considered Bishul Yisrael even if it doesn't exactly look like it. And therefore, when something goes wrong, and the food is not Bishul Yisrael the way we want it to be, the food is not automatically treif. Even though Bishul Akum is treif, and even though Bishul Akum have to kasher the kelim, you need to ask a question. You need to turn around and say, this went wrong. Let's say get the French fries. Okay, they cooked the fries, and I didn't turn on the fryer, and the French fries got cooked by the guy who cooked the French fries, and I was not part of it. So they broke the rules. They didn't do what they were supposed to. Now you need to ask a shaila. Now that shaila is going to depend on one is going to be the din. In din, is it really mutter or is it not mutter? But even if it's mutter in din, then Rabbi Eisbach, Rabbi Katz take it away and says, well, does this place follow the rules? Did they maliciously break the rules? Do they need to be taught that this is the rules? You always have to have the fire on? So there's a lot of things to weigh here. The first part is going to be well, what's the din? Is it really maybe mutter? Maybe it's mutter. I'm going to give you a few examples. That's why I'm here to give you some examples of that. But there's also other parts of the decision also. It's like, what's the situation? What really happened that made that it should not be Bishul Yisrael and not the way we want it to be? Okay? So
the question is, if they made the French fries not Bishul Yisrael, what the chicken that they put in, was that also not Bishul Yisrael?
The same fryer.
Yeah, because they all use the same fryer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you don't look just at the French fry, you look at the fryer. Okay, what else did you make today? That's my first question.
Okay, fair. Okay, so I have a few examples of things where, in each one of these cases, there's a possibility that the din would say that you don't need to be Bishul Yisrael. I'm mentioning these possibilities just you'll be more intelligent, you'll know more, but it also means that you should know to ask the question. When someone messed up, they didn't make it Bishul Yisrael, it wasn't made correctly, they say, you know what, maybe it's okay. I need to turn to somebody who understands more. Go to every cat, tell me what we should do with this case. So again, first you're going to judge the din of it, mutter usher, and then you're going to judge the situation. In this situation, do we tell them, hey, okay, but the evidence mutter, or do we say, no way, just throw the thing out? Okay. I'll tell you a story. Not to Bishul Akum. There was a person who was applying for a job at a hashgacha, and important job at a hashgacha, and they said to him, "You come to a kiddush, you're the mashgiach." He wasn't applying to be the mashgiach, like a future mashgiach, but they said, "You come to a job. It's Friday night. You show up at the job, and the kugel arrives half an hour before Shabbos, and has the wrong hashgacha on it. It doesn't have the hashgacha that it's supposed to have. It's not sealed up the way it's supposed to be. It came with the wrong hashgacha on it. And you look at the hashgacha, it's a weak hashgacha. It's not horrible, but it's not really up to your speed. You really wouldn't usually take this. You wouldn't take this. What would you do? So, of course, he said first the politically correct answer, I'd call Rabbi Eisbach. It wasn't Rabbi Eisbach, but I'll call somebody more important, and I'll ask them what I should do about it. They said, no. It's almost Shabbos. You can't get through anybody. You got to figure this out. I say, what would you do? He says, what would you do? Okay. So they asked the same question to a bunch of people applying for the same job. So everyone had their own answers. Okay. The person who they hired was the guy who said, throw it out. Throw the whole thing out. Like, so they won't be kugel for Shabbos. Okay, that was the answer they worked for. Sometimes that's the right answer. Sometimes the right answer is, too bad, even if in din we can find a way that it's mutter, we don't always have to, so to speak, follow the beat, allow that to go far.
But what you said, the hashgacha is quite, but either it's good or it's bad.
Right. So some people's answers is, well, how treif could it be if it was just potato kugel? What could be so bad about it? For a weak hashgacha maybe go. The people need the food.
How do you find a weak either it's kosher or it's not kosher?
Okay. I think we can understand that there's good and there's bad, and there's some people who are
You're in Chicago.
Not if you're a serious mashgiach and you're in a restaurant. It's good or bad.
Okay. So one of the places where there's room to be lenient is the following. We know that a yid has to be part of the cooking to make it Bishul Yisrael. What part of the cooking does the yid have to be part of? So usually we do what's the simplest is we're in the starting. We turn on the fires. We make sure we're cooking it. Okay, for Sephardim, they want actually the pot put onto the fire to make sure it's Bishul Yisrael. Okay, but we're there from the very beginning. Okay, what happens if we messed up and we didn't get that? Like, for example, in one of the schools, they were making cholent for the kids, and the guy plugged in the crock pot. They got everything started. The kids put the stuff in, and the guy put on the crock pot. They turned it on. So the cooking got started by people who are not Jewish. They got the food cooking. But Ashkenazim hold that if the Yid participates in the cooking even later on in the process, towards the end, it could still be good. So in that case, they saved it by the Yidden participating later in the cooking. Okay, they did something, whatever they had to do later, to help with the cooking later on, to help to save it. Okay. There's another case was in Dunkin' Donuts.
You mix it.
In Dunkin' Donuts, they have par-baked bagels. Okay, I believe this was in Dunkin' Donuts' question. They had par-baked bagels. The bagels came par-baked means they're partially baked. And the question was that here in the store, I believe it was in Dunkin' Donuts, it was a different store. Okay, I'm sorry, different store. They were finishing off the baking in the store, and the Yid was part of that baking at the end. And the question was, can those be labeled as pas Yisrael? Okay. So, I'm sorry, I think it was the other story, you're right. So they got a sample of those bagels, and here's what the question depends on. If the item is finished cooking, it's completely baked, and you're just warming it up, it's too late for the Yid to help. But if it still needs baking, then the Yid can help out. So in that case you look at this, once we defrosted it, you could see that it was not fully baked. You bite into it, you see it needs more baking to be ready, so you could still help at that point. Okay. In fact, we came back the next morning. Okay, that bagel that was sitting on the desk had still risen. Okay, it wasn't instead of being this big, it was this big. Okay, in fact, you saw how not baked it was, that it was still rising in the bag. We came back the next morning, we had two bagels. Okay. Another example of that is small potatoes that come in the number 10 cans. Little potatoes, okay? Peeled potatoes coming in a can. Those potatoes are cooked in the can. They're fully edible in the can. But the caterers take them out, and they don't serve them as is. They don't just serve white potatoes. They fry them up, and they brown them, and they make them look a little more appealing before they serve them to the person. So is that cooking that they do at that point enough to make it Bishul Yisrael? And the answer to that question, in that case, they come out of the can fully edible. So they need to be Bishul Yisrael in the factory where they put them into the can. The fact that the Yid's going to finish off cooking when he takes them out of the can, that's not going to make it Bishul Yisrael. Because at that point, they're fully edible. He's just helping. It's like he's toasting a piece of bread. The bread, it's fully edible. At that point, it's too late for him to try it.
Tuna in a can.
Tuna in a can? So tuna doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. But think, as a rule, tuna steaks are Oil Shulchan Aruch, but tuna, the way we have it in a can, what happens in a factory is they cook the tuna in live steam. They basically steam the tuna before they put it into the can, and steamed tuna is not Oil Shulchan Aruch. Broiled tuna is Oil Shulchan Aruch, but steamed is not. As a rule, you should just know, think that in the can.
People are just mocked on that?
So,
by tuna?
Okay, so we'll digress for a second. Okay. There are some people who think that tuna needs Bishul Yisrael. It is true, there are some. The people who ask for Bishul Yisrael tuna, it's really, I can use the word, a misnomer. There are two questions about canned tuna. One is whether it needs Bishul Yisrael, and they're pretty obvious that it does not. The second question is, do you have to have a mashgiach standing watching every fish to make sure it's a kosher fish? Does it need hashgacha timidus to watch that every fish is actually kosher, or can you just assume the can has kosher fish in it? Okay?
But that has nothing to do with Bishul.
It has nothing to do with Bishul. So what happens is, many people are mocking on that second question, that you have to have a mashgiach standing there. Now, once the mashgiach is standing and they say, dope, you're standing there anyhow, I'm sitting all day watching fish go by, turn the fire on already. So they make it Bishul Yisrael also. So they sort of get that in while they're at it. So people call it Bishul Yisrael tuna, but the main value of that is the fact that they had a mashgiach standing there watching the fish be put in, which many hold you have to have, many prominent places hold you have to have that. The Bishul Yisrael is sort of like a throw-in while, might as well do while we're at it. They call it Bishul Yisrael tuna, but that's not the main part. The main part is the hashgacha timidus on it.
1 second, but there's some shittas that hold that you don't look at the actual finished product, you look at what the product is at the beginning, right?
Potato chips.
Like potato chips, right? Everybody will agree that potatoes need to be Bishul Yisrael, but not everybody holds that you need to have French fries. I mean, potato chips to be Bishul Yisrael, because potato chips itself is not a Shulchan Aruch, but people, there are shittas that look at the original product. If the potato needs Bishul Yisrael, then the fried needs Bishul Yisrael. The same thing is with the tuna. If you hold that a tuna needs Bishul Yisrael, changing the form of how you make it doesn't change the halacha. That's machlokes.
So Rabbi Katz is correct.
You can't just say that it's a misnomer. That those people that are makbid on Bishul Yisrael is not really Bishul Yisrael. Correcting that.
Rabbi Katz, what I said is that the Bishul Yisrael, it's much stronger need to have hashgacha t'midus. The people who want hashgacha t'midus have much firmer ground to stand and say, I need hashgacha t'midus. Those who say you need Bishul Yisrael is not as strong of a reason to have it. Most of the people asking for it are calling it Bishul Yisrael tuna, but that's not their main reason why they want it.
So it's not hashgacha t'midus by the fish, tuna fish, where you're just basing it on bittul.
No, on the fact that the company, for business purposes, make sure that only tuna goes into the can. Which is true, because the people who do hashgacha t'midus say they have never ever seen another fish go into the can. They stand there and they watch them, but they never ever saw another fish.
And when it comes to Bishul, how do you deal with meat when you're dealing with a Sephardi who needs to put down immediately? What if the goy drops down the meat and it's taken off?
That's a problem. Sephardim do not let a yid do the end. The Sephardi has to do it at the beginning of the cooking. Yeah, that's true.
So what about now? Some people like meat rare, and they can eat it rare, but if it's an Ashkenaz and if he started it, but he wanted to finish it Bishul, at one point you really have to start it from the very beginning too, even on an Ashkenaz.
So the simple answer is yes. You should for a Sephardi, it should be done from the very beginning.
Yeah.
There may be a drop of leaving, but basically for a Sephardi, we say you do it from the beginning. Okay. Our next question. Okay, what happens?
Before you go on to the next thing, but on a bagel, there are bagels that you can eat them the way they are. The box says can be eaten as is, but if you bake it off for 5 to 10 minutes, that'll make it
crispy
better.
and finished.
So that's called being mashbiach, the product.
So why
that does not count.
Why not the potato?
That does not count. But in that case, that is not considered Bishul Yisrael. It's only Bishul Yisrael if it's more for
If it's on the box, take off for 5 minutes and pass the salt. Talk about the pasta salt.
Maybe it goes around it.
It does not make it pasta. It only makes it pasta if the baking still needs to make it edible. Once it's already edible and I'm just making it more desirable, then that's not enough. Okay, now, the next question is, what if I have a suffix? What if we're not sure whether it was Bishul Yisrael or it was not Bishul Yisrael? So the Gemara says, a yid, this is the way, though I'm explaining the Gemara according to a specific opinion. The Gemara says, if a yid is at home or someplace, and the guy put food onto the fire, and there was a yid around, the yid knew that he's supposed to be part of the cooking, but now we have no idea whether the yid did his job or not. Okay? The guy put the food onto the fire, but we don't know whether the yid did his thing to turn the food over. Okay? The yid is supposed to turn the food over to make it Bishul Yisrael. He's supposed to be part of the cooking. We don't know whether that happened or not.
Or you don't know if he turned on the fire.
No, the guy turned on the fire.
Oh.
The guy turned on the fire. The guy put the food onto the fire. The question is whether the yid did something afterwards. There was a yid around, and he's part of the cooking. He's supposed to be doing that, but we don't know if he did or not. Okay? So the din is, the letter of the law is that that's mutter. Bishul Akum, because it's only Issur D'Rabbanan, in that case it's mutter. Okay? Any hashgacha who does that, we wouldn't talk to them. Okay? We wouldn't let a hashgacha say, hey, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not okay. Okay? We once had I had a scenario like that, not in food service, in a commercial hashgacha. This company was making canned, I don't remember what the vegetable was, canned something, and the canning season for that product went, let's say, 3 months. I don't remember how long, a couple of months long, the canning season. The mashgiach who took care of that factory came at the beginning of the season, and he turned on the boiler to make sure that the cooking would be done with his fire. He never came back during the rest of the season. He didn't come back at all. Maybe he dropped in once in a while. Basically, he wasn't there. And he said, this food is Bishul Yisrael. He said, well, how do you know that the boiler doesn't go off? How do you know they don't turn off the boiler for some reason? He said, well, they usually keep it on. He said, but how do you know? So he says, well, in not so many words, he said suffix Bishul Akum is mutter. It's a suffix whether it's Bishul Yisrael. I turned on the fire, it's set up, maybe it went off, maybe it didn't go off. So, technically by the din, he's probably right. But that's not the way we run hashgacha. If we get in hashkafa, we're saying we're making sure the food is kosher. They don't want to hear you're serving me Safek Bishul Akum that technically it was mutter. Okay,
Usually they call the rabbi saying, we need you to turn on the ovens again.
What happens if they don't call
wait a second. They call the rabbi is if the rabbi's around and he's keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
If the rabbi went for a nap, if the rabbi went to play tennis, then we wouldn't say, oh, they probably kept the fires on because maybe they didn't keep the fires on. So, technically, again, if it happened, the mistake happened, you could ask a shayla. But that's not the way we run hashkafa. We don't say to people, it's going to be mutter, it's going to be mutter because something is okay. If I'm keeping an eye on it, then they know that I'm watching, so they'll ask me if they need to turn the fires back on. But we don't.
Like, for instance, the cereal company. Do they have mashketim there all the time?
No, they don't. But what happens is for every food, okay, I'll tell you, when I used to work for the OU, when I worked for the OU, there was a time we did the following project. We made a list of every food that we could think of. They give them hashkafa to. I don't mean the brand names, the types of food. And made a list, and for each food we wrote down on a chart, does this need Bishul Yisrael? And if not, what's the reason? Okay? And the idea of what's the reason is, you have to think why it doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. Okay? As part of this, at one point, I was talking to the OU Mashgichim, and one person in the middle of this whole thing raising, he says, wait a second, I give hashkafa on an apple juice company, and they cook the apple juice. Why doesn't my apple juice need Bishul Yisrael? So the answer was, because apples are edible raw. That's the real answer. But the point is, you have to think it through. So in a hashkacha on the commercial level, they have to think for every food, does this food need Bishul Yisrael? Every food they sit and think through, hopefully, and that was the point of this exercise at the OU was, let's go through all of our foods and make sure we're really thinking this through. That every food we make, the types of food we make potato chips and apples and all kinds of things we make, are we thinking whether they need Bishul Yisrael? And if they need it, then are we doing it? So in the cereal company, someone thinks and says, does this food need Bishul Yisrael? And if his conclusion is that it does, then he has to do something about it. And if his conclusion is that it doesn't, then he's off the hook. But that part of setting up the company is are the ingredients kosher and doesn't need Bishul Yisrael. It's one of the questions you have to think about. Okay, some other little things. Our policy is foods cooked in a microwave and need to be Bishul Yisrael. Rabbi Katz has his whole patent for how he gets around the difficulties of, microwaves, when you put them on, they don't stay on for a minute, right? So how do we make sure the food is Bishul Yisrael in the microwave? But food needs to be Bishul Yisrael in the microwave. There are opinions as to whether food cooked in a microwave actually needs to be Bishul Yisrael. So that means that if somebody by mistake did cook something in the microwave that was not Bishul Yisrael, you should ask the shayla. You turn around and say that they didn't follow the rules, so right now you can't serve that food, because, I don't know if that's okay or not. And I turn back and say, Rabbi Katz, tell me, is that okay? He may turn to Rabbi and say, what should we do now that did happen? What should we do with that food that was made? And then there's whatever the questions are to it.
And what happens to the microwave?
And what happens to the microwave? Yes, the same related question.
Like popcorn.
Right, so, if, for example, if it was popcorn, then the answer coming back would probably be popcorn is not Ola Shulchan Aruch. Now, that doesn't mean, that would be the din part of it. But the practical part might be this. They didn't follow the rules. If their rule was no allowed to turn on the microwave except the mashgiach, Rabbi Katz might say, listen here, you didn't follow the rules, and therefore, you have to throw it in your microwave. I don't know what I'm going to say to them. What I'm saying, sometimes you have to teach people to follow the rules. They did not say, for this, the guy doesn't sit with the Shulchan Aruch saying, am I allowed to cook this? Am I not allowed to cook this? You know what I mean? That's not his job. His job is to follow the rules. So that's, okay, yes.
In most establishments, probably, I would say, the microwave does a pretty lousy job of cooking the popcorn. But most people use it for just a quick rewarm, where something's already mismatchable surface. So is that?
No, I'll give an example. Not like that. A common item that they use microwaves for are potatoes, and those are raw, and those need to be turned on by a heat. In order to get around that problem, we tell them, bake the potato in the oven, and then finish it in the microwave, so then there's no shiloh of Bishul Akum, because
At what point does that have to be brought to a par bacon and oven?
Well, you cook it 50%, you don't have a problem.
Right,
So
so
50%, then you're fine. Then
So
they
if you're in a situation where all they do is warm up food in the microwave, if that's the whole style of what they do, then with permission, you'll say to them, you guys can use the microwave. That's not one of the restrictions. You're allowed to use it. If you're in a place that does both, then you have to figure out what the rules are. How do we make a rule that says you could turn it on sometimes or not other times? How does it work in practice? You have to.
It's the same thing in a regular oven.
Well, in a regular.
If there's food that doesn't need to be passed as well. That's why we turn on the oven all the time.
Right.
Right. It prevents accidents from happening.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
Okay.
are there to prevent accidents.
One less example is that for Bishul Akum, there's a rule, we follow a rule of Roy. We follow majority. And there are two forms of how we follow majority. One is for cases of b'di'evet. Something with Bishul Akum, it got mixed into other food. Okay, a little bit of Bishul Akum got mixed in something else. The technical din is, it's balt b'roiv. As long as there's more of the other food than this food, it's balt b'roiv. As long as there's more of the kosher food than the Bishul Akum, it's balt b'di'evet. Okay? Again, whether that you should do that in practice, you have to ask a shayla. But the technical letter, the letter of the law is balt b'roiv and it's smoke. The other example of roiv is a different kind of example. And that is, when I make something that has many ingredients in it, okay, I make vegetable soup. And the vegetable soup has carrots and celery that are edible raw. They don't need bishul yisrael. But it also has potatoes that do need to be cooked. Those are not edible raw. So the potatoes need bishul yisrael, but the carrots and celery don't need it. So does this soup need bishul yisrael, or does it not need bishul yisrael? For that, we also follow the majority. What's the majority of this thing is something that needs bishul yisrael or not, and making the call as to whether it needs bishul yisrael or not. Now, again, I said it 5 times already. In the restaurant, everything needs to be bishul yisrael. But if they didn't make it bishul yisrael, and you turn back and say, okay, they made this food that was not bishul yisrael, what do we do now? Well, now, that might depend on the recipe. Let's look at the food and see, is this a food that is mainly things that are edible raw or mainly not things edible raw? And again, that's part of the discussion. Okay? So just to summarize, a lot of effort goes into making food bishul yisrael. We do lots to make sure it's bishul yisrael, because if it's not, the food will be treif, the kelim will be treif also. So we put lots of effort into that. But there are lots of situations when something that was not bishul yisrael is actually really kosher anyhow. Even though it doesn't appear to be bishul yisrael, it's really kosher anyhow. And those situations, we just have in our back pocket to know to ask the shayla for that case.